Good afternoon and welcome to the Introduction to Neuro Linguistic Programming, hosted by the CDI and presented by JCA. We've got two presenters here today for you, Miriam McCallum and Bill Davis, and they'll be talking you through an introduction to Neuro Linguistic Programming. Please submit any questions through the GoToWebinar app and we'll get to them towards the end of the webinar. Now may I introduce our speakers?
Hello, this is Bill Davis, and Miriam will introduce herself shortly. We are psychologists working for JCA, occupational psychologists in Cheltenham, and we are bringing you the webinar on NLP today. So welcome all. Just a couple of things about housekeeping today. Dan at the Career Development Institute is kindly hosting this, so he's in the background. And if you have questions, then please do type in your questions into the space in the on the screen, and hopefully you can see that. And we'll be taking questions towards the end, and Dan will be listening in, so we'll give him a clue that we want him to tell you the questions that are coming through. So do keep them coming during as we're speaking, but we will only address those towards the end of the webinar. So Miriam and I will start to talk shortly, and then we'll take a break for those. And apart from that, we will just crack on. So I'm just introducing myself now. As a principal psychologist working for JCA, I've been with JCA since '99. Before that, I worked for a couple of career services, Wiltshire Careers Guidance Service and Avon Career Service, and that changed its name a number of times. But for quite some years, worked in the careers service, trained actually in the Diploma in Careers Guidance, 83, 84 at Bristol Poly as it was then. Just very briefly to say that my experience of NLP mainly has been through various bits of training, never fully accredited, and Miriam's here as our star because she's been through far more of the accreditation process. But through the various trainings I've had, I have applied it both within the careers domain and outside in the coaching domain. So I hope to bring that to the webinar today. So just briefly to Miriam to introduce herself.
Hello everybody, thank you Bill. So I work with Bill, my name's Miriam McCallum, I'm also a business psychologist. I've been working as a coach, mostly coaching for the past nearly 20 years, and although it's not specific to careers, I work with people, I guess, in their careers and where their careers transition or where they get new promotions or even when they've lost a job and then acquire another one. And I use NLP all the time in my work. So as Bill said, I'm a master practitioner of NLP and also a qualified trainer of NLP. So in the past I have run courses accrediting master practitioners and practitioners. So it's a real pleasure to be here today talking about hopefully something I think you'll find really useful.
Lovely, thanks Miriam. We're just moving on to the next slide, which just briefly introduces who we are at JCA. This is our marketing slide with various things on it, but basically we're a people development business, and a lot of our work is based around emotional intelligence, and what we do with businesses by and large is to work with managers and leaders to help their effectiveness largely in creating the right climate where people can thrive and perform better. So a lot of the work that we do and the research that we do is linking performance to well-being actually, and engagement, and emotional intelligence is our kind of research base. So that's who we are. We're based in Cheltenham. We work around the world in plenty of well-known areas. I'm not too sure whether the next slide actually has the list. I think it typically does, but no, we haven't got our other slide, which would say there's quite a range of public and private organisations that we work with, both within the UK and globally, but it's largely around as I say, people development and emotional intelligence. And within that frame, we utilize aspects of NLP, and what we're going to be covering in the session today is, what is NLP, how is it used, but we're very aware that quite often NLP over the years has been shrouded in some debate and query. So we're not going to shirk that. We're going to touch on that. We also want to look at this webinar from the perspective of, for some of you, you will be possibly fairly well versed in NLP, but this is very much an introductory session. But for those of you who are just engaging with this, then why should you, and what considerations might there be in terms of whether you draw on NLP within your practice. We'll be looking at how you can find out more if you are interested in it. We'll be looking at case studies and talking personally about our experience of using it within the careers context, and we'll be looking at how you might get trained also. So hopefully that will cover the sort of things that you're looking for from this session. So that links to the next slide. So at the end of this session, you should be able to describe what NLP is, understand that debate that I mentioned, look at those considerations I mentioned there. We will be talking about case studies, tools and techniques, so we'll try and make it as practical as possible. We will be taking a break for questions. As I say, that's going to be towards the end when Dan's had a chance to have a look at those and put some to us, so he will be intervening at some point as well for that. And we'll also touch on, well, how can I find out more and where are the resources? So in a moment I will hand over to Miriam, because the first question really on the agenda is, what is NLP? And let's try to start to define it. So I'm going to pass over to Miriam now.
Hello, everybody. So it's a great question. What is NLP? I guess it's useful to remind ourselves what it stands for. So it stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming, which is a long and cumbersome title, so that's why we call it NLP. So there are many definitions, as simple as whatever works, the study of excellence, which is one of my favorites, the study of the structure of subjective experience, bit of a mouthful, but I think it's a very useful definition actually, because it's about how we perceive the world and how we structure the way that we see the world. So that immediately sounds a little more intriguing, I think. Another definition is an attitude and a methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. The attitude is one of continuous learning and curiosity. And that's very prolific in the NLP world. So that kind of an attitude will generate different systems and processes and ways of working and solving problems, which are the trail of techniques. I guess one of the criticisms of NLP is there is no specific theoretical foundation, and it really draws from so many different disciplines, which I think makes it a very rich field. So from the area of linguistics, from humanistic psychology, from the realms of philosophy, and from psychology too. So lots and lots of different realms that are drawn together in this attitude and methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. So we have some areas here: constructivist, which you will recognize as the way that we make sense of things, with an emphasis on language very often, and developmental, as in we are developing and learning and growing through viewing the world in certain ways. Humanistic, which is very much about a belief in the potential of people, and the view that we have a lot more potential than perhaps we realize. If we could access it, then we will be better versions of ourselves. And perhaps best really described as a field or a collection of approaches. Oops, just trying to move on to my next slide, and it's not letting me. Okay, sorry, a small little technical hitch here, and thank you, Bill, who's reached over and pressed the right button. So in terms of understanding a little bit about what it is, if you could have a 1-minute seminar to describe NLP, this might be what it would look like. So there are a number of simple ideas in NLP. So if, for example, if you're very clear and you know what your outcome is, then it's going to be easier to achieve it. So we talk a lot about very specific language, and sometimes people don't know what their outcome is, particularly in careers. So that is an interesting discussion by itself. But if you know what your outcome is, and you're able to develop rapport, you're able to really connect with people, and that is going to help you achieve your outcome. The third pillar is sensory acuity. So this is our ability to really notice what's going on in front of us. So paying attention to lots of things, what is said, what is not said, gestures, facial expressions, body language, all of these things that we can see, and having the sensory acuity to really notice small changes moment to moment as we are trying to have a negotiation or a career development conversation or a coaching conversation, how well you pay attention to those things. And the last one links to the others really, so that we can be very flexible in our behavior. So if you notice from your clarity of outcome, from your rapport, from the sensory acuity in the moment, that the conversation isn't on track or things are not so clear, then you can change things. You can have the behavioral flexibility to change what you're doing, try a different tack. All of those, if you like, sit on a foundation of what we call the NLP presuppositions, things that we propose are true in NLP. So just some simple ideas around what NLP actually does or what the techniques might entail. So NLP really came from a question, which is, what's the difference between people who do things well and people who do things really extraordinary well? And it began with the idea of modeling, which is really what NLP is about. It's about modeling excellence. One of the definitions was the study of excellence. And all of these people featured here are really key in the NLP history and current world. So initially, NLP began with people modeling or studying therapists. And the lady on the bottom right-hand corner is a lady called Virginia Satir. So she was a family therapist and was really extraordinary at what she did. So Bandler and Grinder, who are the two guys at the top left, Bandler on the first and then Grinder. So they modeled Virginia Satir, and they really helped understand what she was doing when she did family therapy. And what they specifically modeled was a particular way she had of using language. So she's very famous for her language of specificity, but had extraordinary rapport with her clients and was really able quickly and easily to get to the root causes of problems or issues that they had. So Bandler and Grinder continued to model really successful and leaders in their field. So the guy there in the sort of purple suit on the bottom left is Dr. Milton Erickson. So Milton Erickson was the first medical professional to bring hypnosis to the world of medicine. So they modeled him also. And his work was very, very different to Virginia Satir. He, because he used hypnotic language and the world of trance, he used language in a very different way. So they modeled his use of language also, and that's called the Milton model, which really helps access people's imagination and helps influence through language the changes in the way that people are thinking. So eliminating self-limiting beliefs or those kinds of things can be worked with either using the Milton model, hypnosis, language, the language of suggestion, or Virginia Satir's the language of specificity to really understand what it is. So some other really important people here, Robert Dilts, who I think is just fantastic. He was around at the very beginning, knew Bandler and Grinder, introduced them to many other people, and still runs many fantastic seminars today and often visits the UK. And if you get a chance to see him, I would really recommend it because he's absolutely fantastic. And brought a lot of, so because of him, we have really good techniques that you can write out and learn and do. So he brought a sort of scientific approach to the whole thing. So the top right-hand lady is Judith Delosier, who works independently and with Robert Dills. She was married to John Grinder. She isn't anymore, but another very inspirational lady, has written a lot, contributed a great deal to the field, and was there at the beginning also. And in the bottom, we have Fritz Perls, so more from the psychiatry side. So he has hugely influenced a lot of the work in NLP, particularly the way that we use time and, again, hypnosis. So Bill will talk later about some techniques like the rewind and working with the past. So a lot of that has been influenced by him, as has Gestalt, which you're probably quite familiar with. So I guess NLP comes from lots of different areas. We have psychiatry, psychology, therapy, medicine, already here in this small collection of people. So just to give you a sense of, I guess, where it's come from. So this next slide is what we call the NLP communication model, and I could probably spend a month talking to this exact diagram. Second from that original 2 million. So the filtering processes are very complex, and there's a number of ones here. So at the very top we have deletion. We delete things. We don't hear. If you've ever been in an argument and someone says, I never said that, you know, they probably did. We delete things. We generalize. It's how we learn. So every time we see a chair that doesn't look like what we've seen before, we don't have to try and work out what it is. We're able to generalize from past experiences. It's how we learn. And we distort. It's our imagination. We change our experience of what something could be, or distort something. And we do that all the time in terms of what we see, hear, and feel, and taste, and smell, using all of our senses. So language is an important filter also. So if you know the difference between towards and away motivation, for example, what do you want versus what are you trying to get away from? That's a language filter. Our memories filter our experience. Our stereotypes, our biases, all of these things. Decisions that we have made in the past. So, for example, a decision or a self-limiting belief will hugely impact our internal experience of something. Meta-programs are like thinking patterns. I mentioned one earlier, towards and away is like a meta-program. Whether we sort things by the same or difference is a meta-program. Our values, a huge filtering device, what's really important to us, our beliefs, the things we believe are true, and our core attitudes. So all of these things and many more basically filter our experience. So we end up with an internal representation, which is essentially what an NLP is called our map of the world, which isn't the world, it's our map of it. And from our maps and our internal representation, we make a state, and the state could be one of curiosity or motivation or energy, for example, and that gives us our physiology. And likewise, our physiology, if we sit up straight and breathe differently, can affect our state and can actually affect our internal representation. So there's many ways to access what's actually going on in our mind. So quite a lot of the training in NLP looks at all of those things in a lot more detail. but that gives you the map for now. So I mentioned presuppositions as the foundation to that sort of those pillars and that house we looked at earlier. These aren't all of them, but there are some of them. And presuppositions, NLP is full of really funny words, which is a criticism of it. But the reason for that is because a lot of it comes from linguistics and how we use language to shape our experiences. So presuppositions, things we presuppose, is a linguistic word. But a much more helpful way of calling them is useful assumptions. So they're not necessarily true, but if you believe that they're true, you might affect your internal representation differently or might see the world differently. So starting at the top left, people make the best choice they perceive available. Many of us give ourselves a terrible time over the wrong career decision we made, or we didn't work hard at school, or we didn't make the right choice. And it can become a very negative thinking frame for many people. So helping people understand, well, at the time that you made that decision, you thought it was the best thing, with the resources you had available, with the information you had available. So it's a really quite a forgiving assumption. If it's possible in the world, it's possible for me. Sometimes that's written as, if it's possible for someone else, it's possible for me. If someone else can do this, then so can I. A very useful thing to believe. The map is not the territory. We only have our own reality. Relates a little bit to philosophy about this idea that of the constructivist thing that we mentioned earlier, that we are creating our own maps all the time. But the map, our reality that we experience inside, is just a map. It's not the terrain. It's not the actual reality of outside. So that's also, you can get a sense of how useful these are. So as an exercise, what we often do in coaching is to have these labeled as cards on the floor and get people to stand on them and experience the world, even just for a few moments. If that was true for you, then how would that affect the way you're feeling right now, or the decisions you might make, or any of the limiting beliefs you might have about yourself? And people tend to actually have quite a shift when they do that and think, well, if I thought that, then I wouldn't think like this anymore. I'd be able to do this. I would have that conversation, etc. Energy flows where the attention goes. So we often ask people to imagine the sentence, don't think of a blue tree. Of course, most people have to think of a blue tree and then decide not to think about it. So what are you paying attention to all the time with language, with your mind, with your energy? Because that's what you'll have a lot more of in your life if you do that. Feedback versus failure. So NLP is very much around curiosity, very humanistic. So feedback is seen as learning. It's not failure, it's learning. And positive intentions. So the idea here is that all behavior has a positive intention. In a conflict situation, that's really interesting, because so what is the needs of the person that are not being met? What's the intention of that behavior? Not worrying too much about the behavior. So it gives you great wisdom to try and understand intention more. And there are others, but they're incredibly useful companions, actually, I think, for us as coaches as well as the people that we're working with. So here, the next slide looks at some of our coaching techniques, and in a moment Bill is going to share some of his favorites. There are many coach. I mean, NLP is just like a whole big training program full of techniques, all based on the idea of curiosity, all based on this NLP communication model and on the presuppositions. So the first one there is meant to be the one with all the little brain and the whirring things inside is meant to represent the NLP communication model, but also how we use language. So using Virginia Satir, which is called the meta model. How do you know that? How specifically do you experience that? To really help use language to direct someone's thinking. Or the Milton Erickson model. I wonder if you can imagine what success looks like. What's going on now? So very different kind of language. Well-formed outcomes is the NLP how to set a clear goal. So there's a slide of that later on. But it's a very interesting set of questions that just really helps people clarify what they want. Remember, this is on the 1-minute seminar. People who are good at NLP coaching are very good at helping people clarify what it is they want. So the idea of the elephant, and this is a parable, it's a poem actually, some of you might have seen it, but it's all these blind men and they're all touching a different part of the elephant, and because of the part they're touching, they all have a representation of what they think it is. So it's to do with the idea that everyone's map is different. We all have different information, and a lot of our information is missing, so we don't see the whole picture. So NLP is very much around trying to help people fill in those gaps in their reality. The Gestalt, I've mentioned this in relation to Fritz Perls earlier, and this is a timeline. So this is something that's taught on NLP to help people revisit the past and clear things up, do a bit of spring cleaning, and put in, if you like, some more useful attitudes and learnings and wisdom from things that have happened in the past, and also working in the future. So very often when I'm coaching, I will have someone imagine that they're, I don't know, 20 years older, and they're sitting in a room and they have some really important wisdom to share with you in your current age now. So and I ask them, what would the future you say? And they always tell me. So it's just a way of kind of using your imagination a little bit to help shake up people's, make their maps of the world less rigid and more curious and explore learning. So I've got a pair of hands here. So there's a technique in NLP which is called, it's called a number of things. One of the things is called parts integration, which is sometimes people say, well, a part of me wants to do this and a part of me wants to do that. So Virginia Satir used to have what she called parts parties. So you actually metaphorically ask the person to say, well, imagine the part of you that wants X. Imagine they could come out on one hand. You know, metaphorically, what do they look like? And people sometimes say, well, it's like me with long hair, or it looks like my mom, or it looks like a rugby player, or it looks like a giant big football. I mean, they'll whatever. And then the part of you that wants the other thing to come out on the other hand, again, get a metaphorical representation. And then you have this conversation with these two metaphors to really understand what each of them want. So it really helps integrate those ideas and help people really get clarity around the intention behind those conflicting behaviors. So it's a way of bringing yourself together, I guess. That's why the hands come together. And those triangles relate to, or the triangle with the different levels relates to something called logical levels, which isn't always represented as a triangle and actually much more beautifully represented as an onion. And Bill is going to talk about that specific technique. So looking at different levels of thinking. So I'll just move on to well-formed outcomes and then we'll yeah. So I mentioned that as one of the techniques. So it's just an example. So there's some fantastic NLP books out there. And the lovely thing about the good ones, and most of them are good, is that they have everything all laid out. They're like manuals. So you will see this in any good NLP book that you read. How do you do a well-formed outcome? So, and this is an example. So what kind of career do you want? What do you want to be known for? And questions around that about what do you want? So that's the first part, and you're getting as specific as you can. Something that I can feel proud of, something that I earn X amount of money in, a location that I want to work in, an industry I want to work in. And then we just help drill that down a bit more. So when you achieve this, what will you see, hear, and feel? In other words, how will you know that you've achieved this? What will your evidence be? And that sort of helps people, again, recover lost information. How well does this fit in with your values and your personal vision? That's an example of a question that we call ecology, so that the goals that you're setting need to be congruent with the things that are important in your life. So if you're married and have got young kids and the career you're chasing is one that's going to take you all over the world, how well will that fit in with your lifestyle, with your family, with your young kids? So it helps people remember to connect what they want with everything else that's important in their lives. And ecology is very important when setting a well-formed outcome. Also, things like what might you lose? When you achieve this, what might you lose? Friends, maybe, if you have to move. Certain kinds of experiences. And what will you gain? What will this make possible for you? Is it within your control is a really important question. Because very often we're trying to achieve things, and actually they're not in our control. So what elements of it are in your control? And then you can carry on with different coaching questions. Where are you now in relation to that? What's next for you? Who or what can help you? So it's very much very similar to solution-focused coaching and solution-focused therapy, which you probably would be familiar with. So I'm going to hand over to Bill now. He's going to talk about the onion model.
Lovely, thanks Miriam. This is an opportunity to give Miriam a rest and for me to take over a bit. I just love listening to Miriam. The Irish accent does it for me every time. So I want to just look at three things, if I may. One is to do with, we want to really put as much practical stuff into this webinar as we possibly can. So I want to just talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about the onion model, which you hopefully can see on your screen now, and I'll mention something around another process which I've found to be tremendously helpful as well, before handing back to Miriam. In terms of application of NLP, I think one of the benefits of it, and also a source of criticism, I think, is around just how eclectic it is and how much it is a whole, at one level, a whole jumble of things which aren't just NLP. They're drawn from the study of excellence, and excellence comes from a whole range of different disciplines out there, psychology, philosophy, and a whole range of things. So it can be criticised, and we'll come on to the criticism in a bit more detail a little bit later, but it can be criticised for that. But also it's a wonderful storehouse, I think, of elements, which, because I've now been incorporating, I think, these into my career coaching and my general coaching and my working with people and my teaching over the years. Now, some of these, I think, are almost second nature, but I think NLP really helped me understand them and apply them. So there are things like, for example, the importance of integration, how often people feel that they're going mad when their head says one thing and their heart says another, for example. But how normal that is, and the normalizing process is something which I think is so key for people to feel okay about themselves, just to understand that it is normal, and it is normal to have multiple personalities and different parts of ourselves with different views almost. So the idea of integration, I think, is really quite powerful, and is now also starting to emerge from a lot of neuroscience research, and that links to well-being. Miriam mentioned the importance of physiology and state, and we do a lot of work in our business about helping people understand that, and how when we're in a negative state, we'll often get into a particular physiology and get stuck. And now it's just some very simple things like getting up and walking around, and sometimes we do that with our clients. If you're halfway through a coaching session and suddenly your client's getting stuck, how powerful it can be just to do something simple like getting up and going to the water machine and having a chat on the way. You just really notice the shift. So a lot of these things are very, very simple and practical. The importance of trance, for example, and again, there's a lot of really good work. For example, I am a big fan of the Human Givens Institute, Givens as in what's given to be a human being, and the work of Griffin and Terrell. So the Human Givens Institute, and they do a lot of really good work looking at the power of trance, and sort of debunking a lot of myths around hypnotism. I'll return to that in a moment. So there's a lot that's in the box, so to speak. And I think one great thing I think about NLP is it introduces you to a lot of things which you can be very creative with around working with people that really work at a practical level. Turning to the onion model that's in front of you, I think this is something that I found very powerful when teaching people, actually, when working around careers, and in the sense sense of, what am I aware of working with a client, and what's the client aware of and both utilizing and not utilizing in terms of achieving a goal. So you've got the core self there, and then you've got this line moving out of that towards what should be a kind of goal. That's a line, an arrow, which includes action planning. So it takes me back quite a long way to learning action planning as a process. But what action planning really works, and when will action plans work, and when will they not? I think the logical levels aspect, and Dilts talks a lot about this, really helped me start to really get a framework that made a lot of sense with my clients. So what's going on at all those levels. A simple example for me, about me personally, was that I remember being very stuck in my career. Actually, my first degree was economics. I ended up in finance, ended up absolutely hating it, but getting reasonable feedback about my performance. And there was this thing going on, well, should I stay because I'm actually quite good at this, I'm getting good feedback, or should I go because there's part of me that just feels really uneasy? And it was the values thing. It was really getting in the way of me enjoying my work, actually, and which is why I changed careers. So helping people, quite often, a lot of my career's work is actually helping people almost do kind of an audit, really, of how they see themselves, their identity, their values, and what's working at those other levels. And sometimes it's the beliefs level, for example, that's really holding people back. Again, I remember working with a very successful young woman in the financial arena, and she was a rising star, but suddenly it had hit a real block. And working with her, we started to unpack and look at what underpinned this blockage, and what emerged from the coaching and was that she just felt that she was a bit of a fraud, and that the little inner voice, and Miriam's mentioned this already, this inner voice for her was around, well, I always let people down and underperform. We looked at where was the origin of this, how did this come about, because she wasn't getting any of that from her feedback and what have you, and what it was it took her right the way back to an A-level teacher who caught her just after she'd got her results, and she'd got a number of A's. This is in the days before A stars. It was 3 A's, and she got a B. And the teacher said, oh, you must feel really bad about that. And it was just a throwaway line probably by that teacher, but she had taken it in and inwardly had this script about herself. So once we started to work on that and looked at how false that was, how it didn't stack up with evidence, it started to really free her up. So the onion model, I would say, is an example, I suppose, from NLP that really is useful as a practical tool. Final thing from me, just before I pass back to Miriam, is both a wonderful tool, but also something where I think there's an element of caution around as well. Another really excellent tool and an approach and a discipline that has profound transformational potential is the rewind technique, and Miriam mentioned this earlier on, and that's in essence what that is it's a process by which one can go back and deal with a past traumatic event or a sequence of them that's holding the person back in the present, and actually deal with that successfully at a psychological level. And essentially what it does is it reintroduces somebody back to that event or sequence of events, but in a trance state, and it enables the emotional brain, the amygdala in particular, to re-experience that, but without the associated really negative feelings, the powerful feelings that are usually associated with when the brain hooks back into that and pattern matches back into it. So it unhooks it effectively. It's a very powerful technique, and one I remember utilizing through training. I then went out to utilize it with a client who was moving ahead in their career, very, very successful, but didn't was blocked because basically they got to a point where they became very fearful in any public arena, and the brain was associating any public arena events with a past experience that was traumatic, and it basically was derailing his career. He couldn't get up and do talks, couldn't do seminars, couldn't really operate effectively in wide group discussions, etc., etc. And utilizing the rewind technique unhooked all of that and enabled him then to move on successfully. Why I say that's also a something to be aware of is that actually deploying such a technique, I think, needs to be done in very clear and strict ethical processes and ways of approaching it. And I think to some extent, I think powerful techniques are within NLP, which can be quite significantly badly used, or if not done within an ethical frame, then can actually make matters worse. So we'll come back to that, I think, with maybe some of the criticisms of it. But so NLP for me has been a great treasure trove of really useful, practical elements, which have certainly been part of my practice over a couple of decades now. Just passing you back to
Hello. Well, I love listening to your voice too, Bill. There are so many books in NLP. This is a good one. It's not the best, but it has the best title. And the title is called The User's Manual for the Brain. And that's just listening to Bill there. I was thinking we're born with this extraordinary brain, and we don't have the manual for it, and we don't realize really what you can. And one of the things NLP does is helps us understand what actually you can do by language or the rewind technique or particular techniques, and they're incredibly powerful, and they do change the way people think. So I'm back to my little issue with not my. I need Bill's help now to help move my slide. So Bill mentioned there are some concerns with NLP, and it's perhaps fair to say it's not really NLP that there are concerns with, but people who are using it in an unethical way, and there are some of those practices around. So we seem to be having a small problem moving on to the next slide, but we will do it. We'll not quite sure why it won't move. So I'm just going to
So while Bill and Miriam sort out their slide, I would just like to confirm that we are doing a recording of this webinar, and it will be made available to everybody after the webinar's run. Probably be sometime around midday tomorrow. You will receive an email just with everything attached to it. You will also get copies of the slides, all the presentations, and they'll be available to you for you to download and view when it's convenient for you.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. We'll do double-hander here, so handing over to each other. But just want to come back on this thing that's not grounded in theory. I think there's an element of truth on that which I would want to accept, but also respond by saying that it isn't a theory anyway. It really is. I don't think it should be seen as a theory. I think it's something which tries to integrate a whole range of different things in a practical way. So it's best seen as a kind of a library of ideas, practices, approaches, and what have you, that you can dip into. So I don't think it is a theory, and if it's not a theory, it can't be tested as a theory. A good example of part of this, which is the I-axis and cues, and you might have heard of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, and psychologists would quite rightly say that every attempt to disprove it has worked. So there's no evidence for the VAK model, and it's quite often quite widely used. So what do you do with that? You know, do you because psychologically it's not something that has been tested and proven. So as a psychologist in my training, you know, I accept all of that aspect. At the same time, it is so useful, and has an element of real truth in it when you're working with people. So I am at the same time, while accepting the fact that I think it's not a testable aspect. It's something that I think in NLP you then get into the realm of if it's useful, keep it, and if it's not useful, leave it. And you know, people who are in NLP will say that. Now, that can be seen as a cop-out, and it can easily be seen as something which is quite a useful way of thinking about things in the world. So it's, I think it is a valid criticism, and at the same time, I think it's also about how you frame what NLP is and how you test it for yourself and test it with your clients. So hopefully that doesn't sound like me sitting on the fence, but I'd like to bring Miriam back in for her comments. So, thanks, Miriam. I'm just taking over from Miriam for briefly because I'm aware that we're coming towards the end of the hour, and we're about to invite Dan to put some of your questions to us, because the next couple of slides are about the application of NLP in careers. But rather than necessarily anticipate that, we thought we'd pass back to Dan for your specific questions, because there may well be some things that that you wish to ask of us at this stage. So Dan, do we have anything there?
Thanks, Bill, but everyone seems relatively satisfied so far. We've had no questions come through, and the chat's been quiet, so if you'd like to continue.
Okay, we will continue and say what we think a little bit about NLP and career coaching, and we've touched on a couple of things already. So I don't want to sort of repeat myself, but I think if I was to look at sort of buckets of things that are useful to do with NLP, I would say it's got maybe three main themes for me. One is to do with removing blocks. I think there are things like the rewind technique, the belief change techniques that are around within the organizing ideas of NLP and so on, which I think, and I could go on, but I think working with people around careers, quite often the key is to get over the blocks, and NLP's got a whole range of things within it that are really useful. A second bucket for me, I think, is really about the practice of career coaching and the use of positive language, the use of reframing, and the underpinning attitudes that coaches tend to have if they've been through NLP training, which I think are, fit within the positive psychology realm and are very much aligned with some really good research now that demonstrates that those kind of approaches can be very both awakening and enlivening and motivational, really, for people. So so there's that aspect to it. And I think the third aspect for me around NLP, I think, is to do with really a way of looking at goals and how to enable people to move towards goals. And again, there are buckets of whole techniques that are in there, which I found useful over the years. The onion model would fit in with that, for example. So I think it's those three things for me: removing blocks, the attitudes, the positive psychology attitudes within NLP, and the goal-orientated aspects that come through. So I'm just going to pass back to Miriam to say a little bit more from her perspective.
Just to confirm, Bill, it doesn't appear like we're getting any sound from Miriam's end.
Hello, Dan. I'm just we're trying to talk to Dan at the moment because it doesn't sound like Miriam's voice is coming through. Mm-hmm. So is my voice coming through, Dan?
Yep, you're coming through loud and clear, Bill.
But not Miriam.
Not Miriam, no.
Hello? Is that any better?
Ah, there we go.
She's come back.
Okay, great.
Oh, no, sorry, Miriam. It looks like you've gone again. Sorry about this, guys. Quick change of equipment.
I'm actually using.
Great.
I'm using Bill's. Do I sound a bit like him now? Okay, I was just going to make one last point about NLP helping you to develop greater self-awareness and awareness of others and awareness of, if you like, the system that they operate in. So one really sort of famous technique, which is surprisingly easy to do, is 3 chairs. So the person sits in the first chair and they experience the problem or whatever it is through their own eyes. and then they're asked to move to a second position. So they experience the same problem but through the eyes of someone else. They're using their imagination, but again, really helps them to do that. And then finally, they're experiencing the world as an observer. And I've used that when people have a lot of conflict and difficulties at work, and people will have insights from each of those 3 different positions and really get an understanding of systemically or what's actually going on here in this relationship, what's causing the problem, and they can see so much more using all of those different perspectives. So that's just another example of the kinds of techniques and how easy they are to do and how powerful they are. So lots of things. I think the last thing we were going to say was just some advice about where to go for your training. So when choosing a training, I guess these are questions you might want to ask yourself. Is the training regulated? So is there some kind of governing body? So in the UK, there's the Association of NLP, ANLP, and also the Professional Guild of NLP. Is the training associated with a university or business school? So many of them are now. What's the experience of the trainers? Personally, I think NLP trainers who have other kinds of experience, perhaps they're already psychologists, maybe they've done psychotherapy, sometimes they're nurses, they just have some other experience that tends to lead to a richer experience. What's the criteria for completion of the course? Do you just have to turn up? Are you expected to do some kind of, there's usually a paper or an open book or a test or something for the good ones. And what are your reasons for wanting the training? So there are many fields of NLP. So I mentioned therapy earlier. There is a therapeutic side. There's also an educational side, personal development, careers. So lots of different activities and areas of focus along a spectrum. So quite useful to check out what's the kind, is it a business and career type of seminar, or is it about personal development and well-being? So you get different kinds of feelings, and you would easily get that from the website. And also people, the good trainers out there will talk to you about the kinds of people that come on their courses and what to expect. So bit of research, but you should be fine.
Okay, well, Miriam just handed my headphones back to me, so again, we'll break in a minute just to hear from Dan in case any final questions have come in. Just on the final slide, if it will work, we've got some of Miriam's favourite quotes. Actually, he says, "Knowledge is just a rumour until it's a muscle." We are, each of us, always in the process of becoming, and that's something that I think we share as a very powerful saying, really, from Maslow, and I think it's profoundly true, and one of the great quotes which really challenges, I think, a lot of standard approach to psychology. You know, for example, the psychometric assessment of personality, and how it sees it as relatively fixed, which is true, but at the same time, because we are in the process of becoming, we are evolving as well, and I think that is it's very powerful when we're working with clients to see that they have hope, and hope is so important. I've worked with so many clients over the years who've been made redundant. I remember working also in schools with kids who you know, didn't think they had any hope, and the main thing I hope I brought to those career coaching sessions was a sense of hope, because I think that's where we've got to start. And when people have a sense of that they are developing and can develop within, of course, within limitations, but then that positive approach can be so awakening. And then I won't read the final one there, but again, another powerful quote drawn again from the NLP realm. I hope that you've found that the webinar helpful as an introduction. It is very much a toe in the water. I'm going to hand back to Miriam in a second for just a final thanks from her, so I can listen to her voice again. And and thank you very much for for attending the webinar. We're going to hand back to Dan in a bit after Miriam said a few last words. And I just wanted to say that we would welcome any questions that you might have after the webinar. Dan will probably remind you that this is all captured anyway and available through the CDI. And they also have our contact details. And so if there are matters of detail, then please do get in touch. We'll be only too pleased to help and support with references and tips, hints, and what have you, if you're interested in finding out more. So just a brief few words from Miriam before we pass back to Dan.
Hello, very brief from me. I just wanted to say thank you for listening, and we hope that it's given you an insight into what NLP is and what you might find useful in it, and some tips about what to look for when if you wanted to do some training. I did want to say that you can do like a 1 day, you can do a short course, or you can do a full practitioner or master practitioner. So all the courses are different lengths, so you can have quite a lot of information from an introductory course as well. So thank you, and hope we get to hear from you.
So a big thank you to Bill and Miriam from JCA. They've done a great job today. Everything's run smoothly. You will receive an email sometime tomorrow, which will have the attachments of the slides that you've seen today, as well as a recording of the video, and that will be uploaded to YouTube. Feel free to watch, share with any of the CDI members. Thank you for attending the webinar. I hope everything's gone well for you, and any questions, feel free to contact anyone here at the office. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dan. I don't know whether you want to stay online to talk to us or whether you've now muted all our broadcast.